The coffee machine ground to life in the Bay Area kitchen as morning sunlight streamed through the windows. Victoria Martinez, 38 and 6 months pregnant, stood at the counter sorting through a stack of loyalty program statements. Her fingers traced numbers that simply did not add up. Victoria, honey, did you remember to transfer those airline points from the American Express account? David called from upstairs, his voice carrying that familiar, confident businessman's tone. Victoria shifted her weight, her pregnancy making standing uncomfortable. She could hear the neighbor's dog barking in the distance and traffic beginning to build on the suburban street outside. The stack of credit card statements rustled in her hands as she examined each one more carefully. I'm looking at them now, she called back, her voice carrying a slight breathiness that had developed with her pregnancy. But as she studied the American Airlines account, her breath caught. 50,000 points were missing from their account, points she had never redeemed. Victoria managed all their household finances and loyalty programs. In their 20-year marriage, she had become an expert at maximizing rewards, optimizing their spending to earn the most points and miles. David trusted her completely with these details, often joking that he married her for her financial brilliance. Now, staring at these statements, that expertise was revealing something she had never expected to find. The Chase Sapphire rewards showed hotel bookings she had never made, luxury suites in locations she had never visited. Her hands began to tremble slightly as she flipped to the Hilton honor statement. More points redeemed for romantic getaways she knew nothing about. Victoria sat heavily at the kitchen table, the wooden chair creaking under her weight. Her voice grew quieter as the realization began to dawn. These were not random errors or identity theft. The redemptions were too specific, too coordinated. Someone with access to their accounts was using their carefully accumulated points for trips she was not taking. David, she called upstairs, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. We need to talk about these travel rewards. The sound of footsteps began descending the hardwood stairs. Victoria arranged the statements across the kitchen table, organizing them by date and program. Her analytical mind kicked into gear. The same methodical approach she used for budget planning now applied to investigating her own marriage. David appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed for work in his tailored suit. At 42, he still maintained the confident posture that had attracted her in college. His dark hair showed just a touch of gray at the temples, and his smile was as charming as ever. What's got you looking so serious this morning? David asked, pulling out the chair across from her. His tone was light, casual, but Victoria noticed he did not immediately look at the papers spread across the table. These loyalty program statements, Victoria said, pointing to the documents. There are some discrepancies I cannot explain. David glanced at the papers and shrugged. You know I don't follow those details. That's your department, honey. You're the genius with all that rewards optimization. Victoria felt a familiar flutter in her chest, the way she always did when David praised her financial skills. But today, that flutter was accompanied by something else. Doubt. David, 50,000 American Airlines miles were redeemed from our account last month, for flights to destinations I have never booked. David reached for his coffee mug, taking a sip before responding. Those points business trips. Honey, you know how crazy work has been. The Peterson acquisition has me traveling constantly. Victoria consulted her notes. She kept meticulous records of all their financial activity. But these redemptions show personal bookings, not business travel, and they are for 2 passengers, not 1. Sometimes I have to bring junior associates along, David said, his voice becoming slightly higher and faster. Victoria had been married to him long enough to recognize when he was stressed. You know how these big deals work. Client entertainment, building relationships. The kitchen timer rang, breaking the tension. Victoria had set it the night before to remind her about her prenatal vitamin. The sound felt symbolic somehow, like time running out on something important. David stood up and kissed her forehead gently. I love you, Victoria. You and the baby are everything to me. Don't stress yourself over travel booking details. That cannot be good for little one. His words were loving, his touch familiar and comforting. Victoria wanted to believe him. The pregnancy hormones were affecting her judgment, making her more emotional and suspicious than usual. Maybe she was reading too much into innocent business expenses. "You're probably right," Victoria said, though her internal voice whispered otherwise. "I just want to make sure we are maximizing our rewards efficiently." "That's my brilliant wife," David said, gathering his briefcase. "I have meetings all day, but I'll be home for dinner. Maybe we can talk about baby names tonight." Victoria watched him leave, listening to his car pull out of the driveway. The house felt suddenly quiet, filled only with the hum of appliances and her own breathing. She looked down at the statements again, studying the redemption patterns. Something was wrong. Her expertise with these loyalty programs had saved their family thousands of dollars over the years. She knew every point, every mile, every reward category. These redemptions were not mistakes or business expenses. They were deliberate, romantic, and expensive. Victoria placed her hand on her pregnant belly, feeling the baby shift slightly. "What am I missing, little one?" she whispered to herself. The baby kicked as if responding to her mother's stress. She gathered all the statements into a neat pile, but instead of filing them away as usual, she placed them in a folder marked Investigation. For the first time in 20 years of marriage, Victoria Martinez was going to investigate her own husband. The morning sunlight had shifted across the kitchen, and Victoria realized she had been sitting there for over an hour. Her prenatal appointment was in 2 hours, but first, she was going to make some phone calls. If David was telling the truth about business travel, there would be documentation. If he was lying, her financial detective skills would uncover that too. Victoria stood up slowly, her pregnancy making every movement deliberate. As she walked toward the home office where she managed all their accounts, she felt something she had not experienced in years of marriage. She felt like she was living with a stranger. The hardwood stairs creaked under David's footsteps as he descended to the kitchen. Victoria had spent the morning organizing the evidence on the kitchen table, arranging each statement chronologically to build her case. The scraping sound of his chair against the tile floor seemed louder than usual in the tense atmosphere. "All right, let's see what has you so concerned," David said, settling into his chair and reaching for the stack of papers. His voice carried that familiar tone he used in business meetings, confident and slightly condescending. Victoria watched his face carefully as he reviewed the documents. She had learned to read his expressions over 20 years of marriage, and right now she could see the subtle tightening around his eyes that appeared whenever he was calculating his response. "These American Airlines redemptions," Victoria began, pointing to the highlighted entries. 50,000 miles for round-trip flights to New York in March. "I was at my sister's wedding that weekend. Remember, you said you were playing golf with clients." David shuffled through the papers, his movements becoming slightly more hurried. "Right, right. That was the Morrison deal. Last-minute client meeting. I had to bring Rebecca from accounting to review the numbers." "Rebecca Thompson?" Victoria asked. She knew most of David's co-workers from company social events. She mentioned at the Christmas party that she had never been to New York. "Different Rebecca," David said quickly. "Rebecca Collins from the San Francisco office. You haven't met her?" Victoria made a mental note of the name. Her pregnancy had made her memory sharper in some ways, as if her brain was working overtime to protect her growing family. She moved to the next statement. "These Hilton Honors points," she continued. 30,000 points redeemed for a weekend at the Grand Wailea in Maui. The booking confirmation shows a romantic suite package with couples massage appointments. David's voice pitched higher as he responded. "Client entertainment. Victoria, you know how these luxury deals work. We have to provide premium experiences to close major contracts. The Peterson Group expects 5-star treatment. For a couple's massage," Victoria pressed. "That seems like unusual business entertainment." "It was for Peterson and his wife," David said, but his hand moved to his collar, adjusting his tie in the nervous gesture Victoria recognized. "They were considering our proposal for their entire West Coast expansion. $50 million deal. Honey, sometimes you have to go above and beyond." Victoria wanted to believe him. Every explanation sounded plausible when delivered in David's confident businessman voice. The pregnancy was making her feel vulnerable and dependent, emotions she was not accustomed to after years of financial independence and partnership. "What about these restaurant bookings?" she asked, showing him the Chase Sapphire statement. "Open table reservations, using our points for intimate dinners at Atelier Cren and Le Bernardin. Both reservations for 2 people. Both on evenings when you told me you were working late." David stood up abruptly and walked to the coffee machine, his back to Victoria. "Those were investor dinners, potential backers for the Peterson deal. Victoria, honey, I feel like you are interrogating me here. This is just business as usual. I manage our finances. David, I optimize every point and mile we earn. These redemptions do not fit any pattern of business entertainment we have used before." David turned around, his expression softening. He walked back to the table and sat down, reaching for Victoria's hands. "Look, I know the pregnancy is making you feel anxious about everything. It's natural to want to control all the details when you are preparing for a baby. But you have to trust me here." His hands were warm and familiar, the same hands that had held hers at their wedding 20 years ago. Victoria felt her resolve wavering. Maybe she was being paranoid. Maybe the pregnancy hormones were making her suspicious of innocent business activities. "I just need to understand the patterns," Victoria said, her voice quieter now. "These programs are my responsibility. If there are business uses I don't know about, I should optimize them differently." "You are absolutely right," David said, squeezing her hands gently. "How about this? I will get you detailed expense reports from Ashley at the office. She handles all my business travel bookings. That way you can see exactly how these redemptions connect to client entertainment and business development." Victoria felt a wave of relief. Of course there would be documentation. David's company was meticulous about expense reporting for tax purposes. If these were legitimate business uses of their personal rewards accounts, there would be receipts and justifications on file. "That would be perfect," Victoria said. "I can integrate that information into our rewards optimization strategy." David smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him all morning. "See, we make a great team. You handle the financial brilliance. I handle the business relationships. 20 years and we still complement each other perfectly." The kitchen timer rang again, this time reminding Victoria about her prenatal appointment. She had set multiple reminders because pregnancy brain was making her more forgetful about routine schedules. "I have to get ready for my doctor's appointment," Victoria said, beginning to gather the statements back into their folder. "How is little one doing?" David asked, placing his hand on her belly. The baby kicked immediately, as if responding to his father's touch. "Still active as ever, I see. Dr. Martinez says the baby is developing perfectly," Victoria replied. "Right on schedule for a healthy delivery." "I cannot wait to meet our daughter," David said, kissing Victoria's forehead. "She is going to have her mother's intelligence and her father's charm." Victoria laughed, feeling the morning's tension begin to dissolve. This was the David she had fallen in love with, the man who could make her feel like they could handle anything together. Maybe she had been overreacting to routine business expenses. "I love you, Victoria," David said, gathering his briefcase and laptop bag. "You and the baby are everything to me. Do not stress yourself over travel rewards and hotel points. Focus on staying healthy for our little girl." After David left for work, Victoria sat alone in the kitchen, reviewing the conversation. His explanations were reasonable. Business travel could explain the airline miles and hotel points. Client entertainment could account for the expensive restaurant reservations. She had been managing their loyalty programs for so long that she sometimes forgot how complex business expenses could be. But as Victoria walked upstairs to get ready for her appointment, she could not shake the feeling that something was still missing from the equation. Her expertise with financial details had always been her strength in their marriage. David relied on her analytical skills to manage their household budget and optimize their reward strategy. So why did she feel like those same skills were now revealing something she was not supposed to see? Victoria paused at the top of the stairs, looking down at the kitchen where she had confronted David with her evidence. The morning sunlight had shifted, leaving the table in shadow. The folder marked Investigation sat exactly where she had left it, waiting for Ashley's expense reports to either confirm David's explanations or raise new questions. For the first time in years, Victoria realized she did not know which outcome she was hoping for. 3 days later, while David attended his weekly golf game with business associates, Victoria found herself alone in their home office with her laptop humming quietly and a growing sense of unease. The pregnancy fatigue was battling with her increasing suspicion, creating a restless energy that made concentration difficult. Victoria had been waiting for Ashley to send the expense reports David had promised, but no email had arrived. When she called David's office that morning, Ashley mentioned that business expense documentation might take a few weeks to compile. The delay felt suspicious to Victoria's analytical mind. "Let me just check a few more details," Victoria muttered to her computer screen, navigating to their Marriott Bonvoy account. Her fingers moved expertly across the keyboard, entering login credentials she had memorized years ago. The account history loaded slowly, revealing a pattern that made Victoria's breath catch in her throat. Multiple bookings for romantic suites at luxury properties, weekend getaways to Napa Valley, Carmel, and Mendocino. Each reservation showed 2 guests and premium amenities like champagne service and couples treatments. "What is this charge?" Victoria said aloud, studying a particularly expensive redemption. 75,000 Bonvoy points for a 3-night stay at the St. Regis San Francisco. The booking included a couple's massage package and dinner reservations at the hotel's Michelin-starred restaurant. Victoria cross-referenced the dates with her calendar. That weekend, she had been visiting her mother in Sacramento, while David claimed to be attending a business conference in Los Angeles. The timeline made no sense for legitimate business travel. Her phone rang, interrupting her investigation. Carmen Rodriguez's name appeared on the caller ID, and Victoria felt a rush of relief. Carmen had been her best friend since college, a fast-talking marketing executive with a slight Spanish accent and an uncanny ability to cut through emotional confusion. "Girl, you sound stressed," Carmen said immediately after Victoria answered. "What is going on?" Victoria explained her discoveries, reading directly from the loyalty program statements. Carmen listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of concern or anger. "Victoria, honey, you need to trust your gut here," Carmen said when Victoria finished. "Pregnant or not, you are smart. Those patterns you are seeing, they are not coincidences." "But David explained everything," Victoria protested, though her voice lacked conviction. "Business entertainment, client meetings, expense reports coming soon." "How soon?" Carmen asked. "And why would he use your personal rewards accounts for business expenses instead of the company card?" Victoria had not considered that question. David's company provided corporate credit cards specifically for business travel and entertainment. Using personal rewards accounts for business purposes would create tax complications and reporting issues. "Maybe the company card did not have enough credit limit," Victoria suggested weakly. "For a millionaire husband with a corporate executive position." Carmen's voice carried disbelief. "Victoria, listen to yourself. You are making excuses for behavior that does not make sense." Victoria returned to her computer while keeping Carmen on the phone. She logged into their enterprise rental car rewards account, another program she managed meticulously. The rental history showed luxury vehicles reserved for weekend trips during times when David claimed to be working or playing golf. "Carmen, there are rental car reservations here too," Victoria said, reading the details aloud. "BMW convertibles, Mercedes sedans, all for weekend trips to locations I have never visited." "What kind of business meetings happen in Mendocino and Carmel?" Carmen asked pointedly. "Those are romantic getaway destinations, not business conference locations." Victoria's heart was pounding as she navigated to their OpenTable account. The restaurant reservations painted an even clearer picture. Intimate dinners for 2 at romantic restaurants throughout Northern California, wine country tastings, seaside dinners, rooftop cocktail lounges, each reservation carefully timed for maximum romantic impact. "Victoria, are you seeing what I think you are seeing?" Carmen asked gently. "I think so," Victoria whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her pregnant belly. The baby was unusually quiet, as if sensing her mother's distress. But I need more proof. I need to be absolutely certain before I accuse David of anything. What would convince you? Carmen asked. You have travel records, hotel bookings, restaurant reservations, rental cars, all for romantic getaways you never took. What more evidence do you need? Victoria understood Carmen's frustration, but 20 years of marriage could not be dismissed based on loyalty program irregularities alone. There had to be a reasonable explanation that she was missing. David loved her. They were expecting their first child together. He would not risk their family for an affair. I need to see who he is with, Victoria said finally. The bookings could still be legitimate business entertainment with female clients or associates. I need proof of actual infidelity, not just suspicious spending patterns. Carmen was quiet for a long moment. Victoria, honey, I love you, but you are in denial. No business entertainment looks like this. These are romantic getaways with another woman. Victoria knew Carmen was probably right, but accepting that reality meant accepting that her marriage was built on lies. The pregnancy made her feel trapped and vulnerable. She could not simply pack a bag and leave like she might have done 20 years ago. She had a baby to consider now. Help me get proof, Victoria said to Carmen. If David is having an affair, I need evidence that will hold up in divorce proceedings. If he is telling the truth about business entertainment, then I will apologize for doubting him. What do you need me to do? Carmen asked without hesitation. I need to follow him, Victoria said, the words feeling surreal as she spoke them. This Saturday, he claims to have a golf tournament at the country club. I want to see where he actually goes. Carmen agreed immediately, offering to rent an unmarked car and help with surveillance. As they finalized their plans, Victoria felt a strange combination of dread and determination. Her expertise with financial details had revealed the inconsistencies in David's story. Now she needed to see the truth with her own eyes. After ending the call with Carmen, Victoria sat alone in the home office, surrounded by loyalty program statements that told a story she was finally beginning to understand. Her hands rested on her pregnant belly, and the baby kicked strongly, as if approving of her mother's decision to seek the truth. What am I going to do? Little one, Victoria whispered to her unborn daughter. What am I going to do if Daddy is not who we thought he was? The sound of David's car pulling into the driveway interrupted her thoughts. Victoria quickly closed her laptop and gathered the statements, filing them back into the folder marked investigation. When David walked through the front door, she was waiting in the living room with a smile that felt like a mask. How was golf? Victoria asked, noticing that David's clothes looked remarkably clean for someone who had spent 4 hours on a golf course. Great round, David replied, kissing her cheek. Shot an 82. Not bad for a Saturday morning. Victoria nodded and smiled, but her mind was already focused on the following Saturday. If David was telling the truth, she would find him at the country club playing golf with his regular foursome. If he was lying, she would finally have the proof she needed to confront the reality of her marriage. Either way, next Saturday would change everything. Meanwhile, across town in a downtown San Francisco high-rise, David Martinez was settling into his corner office on the 32nd floor. The sounds of the business district filtered through his windows, phones ringing in adjacent offices, elevator dings from the lobby, and the constant murmur of business conversations that defined his corporate world. Victoria had decided to call David's office directly, hoping to confirm his schedule and verify some of the business meeting details he had mentioned. She dialed his direct line, expecting to reach him immediately since he had told her he would be in meetings all morning. David Martinez's office. This is Ashley speaking, came the bright, bubbly voice of David's secretary. Ashley sounded young, probably fresh out of college, with the enthusiastic tone of someone new to corporate life. Hi, Ashley, this is Victoria Martinez, David's wife, Victoria said, trying to keep her voice casual and friendly. Is David available? I wanted to confirm our dinner plans for tonight. Oh, hi, Mrs. Martinez. Ashley's voice lit up with recognition. Mr. Martinez is in meetings all day today. He specifically asked not to be interrupted unless it was an emergency. But as Ashley spoke, Victoria could hear something in the background that made her blood run cold. David's laugh, but not his professional business laugh. This was intimate, playful, the kind of laugh she recognized from their private moments together. Victoria stayed silent on the phone line, listening carefully. She could hear a woman's voice giggling in response to David's laughter. "David, stop it. People will hear us," the woman said, her voice carrying clearly through what must have been David's open office door. Victoria's heart began pounding so loudly she was afraid Ashley might hear it through the phone. She pressed the receiver closer to her ear, straining to catch every word of the conversation happening in her husband's office. "The points came through for the Napa Valley Resort," the woman's voice continued. "The weekend package looks perfect. Spa treatments, wine tastings, couples massage." Victoria recognized the booking immediately. She had seen that exact redemption in their Marriott Bonvoy account history just days earlier. 75,000 points for a romantic weekend that David had claimed was business entertainment. "My wife handles all that stuff," David's voice carried clearly through the phone. "She never pays attention to the details. Victoria is brilliant with the financial optimization, but she does not question how I use the rewards she earns for us." The casual dismissal in David's voice was like a physical blow. Victoria realized she was holding her breath, afraid that any sound might alert Ashley to her continued presence on the line. "Are you sure she will not find out?" the woman asked, and Victoria could hear genuine concern in her voice. "Victoria trusts me completely," David replied with confident arrogance. "She manages the accounts, but she does not track individual redemptions unless I specifically ask her to. And why would she? We have been married 20 years. She has no reason to be suspicious." Victoria ended the call silently, setting her phone down with trembling hands. She was sitting in her car in the grocery store parking lot, having decided to run errands while processing her morning discoveries. Now she felt trapped in the small space, unable to drive while her world was collapsing around her. The pregnancy made her feel physically constrained, unable to simply drive away from her problems like she might have done in her 20s. The baby was a constant reminder of what was at stake in this marriage, what she would be responsible for protecting if David's betrayal was as extensive as it appeared. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text message from David. "Working late tonight. Do not wait up. Love you both." The casual lie felt like another betrayal. Victoria now knew David was not working late. He was planning another romantic evening with whoever the woman in his office was, using rewards points that Victoria had carefully accumulated through their joint financial management. "I need proof," Victoria said aloud to her empty car, her voice steadier than she felt. "I need evidence that will hold up in court." The baby kicked strongly, as if responding to her mother's determination. Victoria placed both hands on her belly, feeling her daughter's active movements. This child deserved a father who was honest and faithful. If David could not be that man, then Victoria would need to build a different kind of future for both of them. Victoria started her car and drove toward home, but instead of feeling defeated, she felt something she had not experienced in years of marriage. She felt angry, not the hurt, confused anger of betrayal, but the focused, determined anger of someone who had been underestimated. David thought she never paid attention to details. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was about his wife's analytical capabilities. On the radio, a love song began playing that she and David had danced to at their wedding. For a moment, Victoria felt a wave of sadness for the marriage she had thought they had, the partnership she had believed in for 20 years. Then she reached over and switched off the radio decisively. That marriage, if it had ever really existed, was over. Now she needed to focus on protecting herself and her unborn daughter from a man who had been lying to them both. Victoria drove home with a new sense of purpose. David's casual arrogance had revealed more than he realized. She was not the trusting, inattentive wife he described to his mistress. She was a woman with 20 years of financial expertise and a growing determination to use those skills to uncover the full extent of his deception. By the time Victoria pulled into their driveway, She had already begun planning her next steps. Carmen would help with surveillance, but Victoria also needed legal advice and emotional support. Most importantly, she needed to document everything carefully, building a case that would protect her and her daughter's financial future. David had made a critical error in judgment. He had underestimated the intelligence and strength of the woman he had married. That mistake was going to cost him everything. That evening, after David called to claim another late business dinner, Victoria made a series of phone calls that would change the trajectory of her investigation. She started with Carmen, then reached out to two other women whose support she knew she would need in the coming weeks. By 8 o'clock, 3 cars were parked in Victoria's driveway. The sound of car doors closing and footsteps on the front walkway announced the arrival of her emergency support team. Victoria had spent the afternoon preparing, organizing all her evidence, and thinking through the questions she needed answered. Carmen Rodriguez arrived first, carrying a bottle of wine and a determined expression. Her fast-talking energy filled Victoria's living room immediately. "How are you holding up, girl?" Carmen asked, embracing Victoria carefully around her pregnant belly. "I have been thinking about this situation all day, and I brought reinforcements." Phenomenon Margaret Chen arrived next. A divorce attorney in her 50s with steel gray hair and a reputation for handling high-asset divorce cases. Carmen had connected Victoria with Margaret through her professional network, and the attorney had agreed to provide preliminary consultation on a Saturday evening. "Mrs. Martinez," Margaret said, shaking Victoria's hand with a firm grip. "Carmen briefed me on your situation. I brought some initial paperwork we might need to discuss." The third arrival was Susan Williams from 2 houses down, a neighbor who had become a friend over the years. Susan had gone through her own divorce 3 years earlier and had offered to share her experience navigating the emotional challenges of ending a long marriage. "I brought tea and tissues," Susan said with a gentle smile, "and some practical advice about protecting yourself during this process." Victoria led the 3 women into her living room, where she had arranged all the loyalty program statements on the coffee table. The evidence was overwhelming when presented together dozens of romantic getaways, expensive dinners, luxury hotel stays, all redeemed through rewards programs that Victoria managed but had never authorized. Margaret examined the documents with the practiced eye of someone who had seen financial infidelity many times before. Her precise speech pattern and professional demeanor helped Victoria feel like she was building a legal case rather than just confronting personal betrayal. "This is excellent documentation," Margaret said, reviewing each statement carefully. "Financial infidelity through loyalty programs is becoming more common in high-asset divorces. These rewards represent significant monetary value." Carmen paced around the living room, her energy barely contained. "I cannot believe David thought he could get away with this. Victoria manages their entire financial life. Did he think she would never notice?" Susan spoke more quietly, but her words carried the weight of experience. "I ignored similar signs for 3 years," she admitted. "My ex-husband was using our joint credit cards for another relationship, but I kept making excuses because I wanted our marriage to work." Victoria felt a chill of recognition. "What finally convinced you to stop making excuses?" "When I realized I was protecting him more than I was protecting myself," Susan replied. "When I found myself lying to friends and family to cover for his behavior, I knew something was fundamentally wrong." Margaret outlined the legal implications in clear, professional language. In California, these loyalty program rewards are considered marital assets. If your husband has been using them for an extramarital affair, that constitutes dissipation of marital assets. It strengthens your position in divorce proceedings. The word divorce hung in the air like a challenge. Victoria had been avoiding thinking that far ahead, focusing on gathering evidence rather than considering ultimate consequences. "I do not know if I am ready to think about divorce," Victoria said honestly. 20 years of marriage, a baby on the way. Maybe we can work through this with counseling." Carmen sat down next to Victoria on the couch, taking her friend's hands gently. "Honey, you caught him planning romantic getaways with another woman while you are 6 months pregnant with his child? What exactly would you be working through in counseling?" Susan nodded in agreement. Couples counseling only works when both people are committed to honesty. Your husband is actively deceiving you while you are carrying his baby. That shows a level of selfishness that is very difficult to change. Margaret provided the legal perspective. You do not have to make any final decisions tonight. But documenting this behavior now protects your options later. If you decide to pursue reconciliation, the evidence is there if the behavior continues. If you decide to file for divorce, you have a strong case for favorable asset division. Victoria realized these three women were offering her something she had not had since discovering David's deception. A support system of people who believed her concerns were valid and her evidence was compelling. What do I need to do to protect myself? Victoria asked. Margaret pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. First, continue documenting everything. Save all loyalty program statements, credit card bills, and any communications related to these unauthorized redemptions. Second, consider opening individual bank accounts in your name only. Third, if you are planning surveillance, make sure you have reliable witnesses. Carmen volunteered immediately. I will help with surveillance. If David is meeting someone, we need to see it with our own eyes. Susan offered practical support. I can help with emotional preparation. Discovering the full truth about your spouse's betrayal is traumatic, especially during pregnancy. You need people who can provide perspective and encouragement. Victoria felt something she had not experienced since finding the first suspicious loyalty program statement. She felt supported and understood. These women were not questioning her suspicions or suggesting she was overreacting. They were treating her like an intelligent woman whose analytical skills had uncovered important evidence. There is something else, Victoria said, sharing the phone call revelation from that morning. She described overhearing David discuss the Napa Valley weekend with his mistress, including his dismissive comments about Victoria never paying attention to details. Margaret made additional notes. That conversation provides context for his intent. He is not just having an affair, he is actively deceiving you while mocking your trust in him. Carmen's anger was visible. He thinks you are naive and inattentive. David has no idea who he is actually married to. Susan squeezed Victoria's hand. You are not naive, Victoria. You are pregnant and focused on building a family with someone you trusted. That makes you vulnerable, not stupid. The evening continued with tactical planning. Margaret explained evidence requirements for divorce proceedings. Carmen volunteered for surveillance operations, and Susan offered ongoing emotional support and practical advice about navigating single motherhood if that became necessary. As the women prepared to leave around 10 o'clock, Victoria felt transformed. The isolated, confused woman from that morning had been replaced by someone with a clear plan and reliable allies. Thank you all for believing me, Victoria said as they gathered their belongings. For taking this seriously and helping me think through my options. Margaret handed Victoria her business card. Call me if you need legal advice or if the situation escalates. Document everything, and do not confront your husband directly until you have completed your investigation. Carmen hugged Victoria tightly. You are not alone in this, girl. David made a huge mistake when he underestimated your intelligence and strength. Susan was the last to leave, pausing at the front door. Victoria, whatever you discover in the coming weeks, remember that you deserve honesty and respect. Your daughter deserves a mother who models self-respect and strength. After the women left, Victoria stood alone in her living room, looking at the loyalty program statements spread across the coffee table. But instead of feeling overwhelmed by the evidence of David's betrayal, she felt focused and determined. Victoria had spent 20 years optimizing their family's financial life, maximizing rewards and building wealth through careful management of every program and account. Now she was going to use those same analytical skills to uncover the full truth about her marriage and protect her daughter's future. David thought he was married to someone who never paid attention to details. He was about to discover exactly how wrong he was about his wife's capabilities. The following Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp Bay Area weather that made suburban weekends feel deceptively normal. Victoria watched from the kitchen window as David loaded his golf clubs into his BMW, whistling cheerfully as he prepared for what he claimed would be a tournament at their country club. Should be back around 4, David called to Victoria, who was standing in the doorway wearing her robe and trying to look casually supportive. The guys are really competitive today, so we might grab drinks afterward to commiserate. Victoria smiled and waved, playing the role of the trusting, pregnant wife perfectly. Have fun, honey. I am planning to spend the day organizing the baby's room. David's BMW disappeared down their tree-lined street, and Victoria immediately went into action. Carmen would arrive in 15 minutes with a rental car, and Victoria wanted to be ready for whatever they might discover. Victoria had spent the week preparing for this surveillance operation with the same methodical approach she used for financial planning. She had studied David's patterns, identified likely alternative destinations based on the loyalty program redemptions, and prepared emotionally for the possibility of witnessing her husband's infidelity firsthand. Carmen arrived precisely on time, driving a nondescript gray Honda Civic that would blend into weekend traffic. Her friend's energy was focused and determined, reflecting the seriousness of their mission. "You ready for this, girl?" Carmen asked as Victoria settled into the passenger seat. "Once we see what David is really doing, there is no going back to pretending everything is normal." Victoria placed her hand on her pregnant belly, feeling her daughter's morning activity. "I need to know the truth, for both of us." Carmen programmed their country club's address into the GPS, and they began following David's most logical route. If David was telling the truth about playing golf, they would find his BMW in the club parking lot and could return home within an hour. "Silver BMW, license plate 7, Adam Mary 5, Carmen recited as they navigated through weekend traffic. "If we see that car anywhere other than the golf course, we have our answer." The drive to the country club took 25 minutes through winding suburban roads. Victoria had made this trip dozens of times for club social events and David's regular golf games. The familiar route now felt ominous, like traveling toward a destination that would change everything. Carmen pulled into the country club parking lot, and they slowly scanned the rows of expensive cars. BMWs, Mercedes, Audis, and Teslas filled the spaces near the clubhouse. But David's distinctive silver BMW with its custom license plate was nowhere to be seen. "He is not here," Carmen said flatly. "David lied about playing golf today." Victoria felt her stomach drop, though part of her had expected this outcome. "Let's check the alternate parking areas," she suggested. "Maybe he parked near the driving range or practice facility." They drove through every section of the country club property, looking for David's car. The parking areas near the golf course were filled with the vehicles of actual golfers, but David's BMW was definitely not among them. "Where do you think he actually went?" Carmen asked as they sat in the parking lot processing this first confirmation of David's deception. Victoria consulted her notes from the loyalty program investigation. Based on the redemption patterns, probably somewhere in the city. The hotel bookings were all urban locations, not suburban or golf-related destinations. Carmen started the car and headed back towards San Francisco. "Let's drive through some of the neighborhoods where those hotel redemptions were concentrated. Pacific Heights, Russian Hill, areas where someone might live if they were having an affair with a corporate executive." As they drove through the upscale neighborhoods of San Francisco, Victoria felt like a detective investigating a stranger's life rather than her own marriage. The city was busy with weekend activity couples walking dogs, families heading to parks, normal people living honest lives with their partners. "There," Carmen said suddenly, pointing to a silver BMW parked outside an elegant apartment building in Pacific Heights. "Same license plate." Victoria's heart began pounding as Carmen found a parking space across the street. David's car was unmistakable, and it was parked outside a building that had nothing to do with golf, business meetings, or any legitimate explanation for his Saturday morning absence. They waited in their rental car, watching the building entrance. The neighborhood was quiet and expensive, filled with well-maintained buildings and tree-lined streets. Victoria recognized the area from some of the restaurant redemptions she had found in their loyalty program accounts. After about 15 minutes, the building's front door opened. David emerged, but he was not alone. A tall, elegant woman with red hair walked beside him, and their body language was unmistakably intimate. David's arm was around her waist, and she was laughing at something he had said. Victoria felt like she was watching a movie about someone else's life. The man embracing another woman looked like her husband, but David had never been that playful and affectionate with her, especially not during her pregnancy. "Is that her?" Carmen asked gently. "The woman from his office." Victoria studied the woman carefully. She appeared to be in her early 30s, professionally dressed in expensive clothes that suggested significant personal income. Her red hair was styled perfectly, and her confident posture indicated someone comfortable in upscale environments. "I think so," Victoria said, though her voice sounded distant even to herself. "The voice I heard on the phone call could have been hers." David and the woman walked to his BMW, continuing their intimate conversation. Victoria could see David opening the passenger door for her, the kind of chivalrous gesture he had stopped making for Victoria years ago. Carmen reached over and squeezed Victoria's hand. "I am so sorry. Honey, I know seeing this is painful." Victoria was surprised by her own reaction. Instead of feeling devastated, she felt something closer to relief. The months of questioning her own judgment and making excuses for David's behavior were over. The evidence was clear and undeniable. "Actually, I feel validated," Victoria said honestly. "My analytical skills were right. The loyalty program redemptions were telling the truth about David's behavior." They followed David's BMW at a discreet distance as he drove his mistress through the city. Their destination was a wine tasting room in the Mission District, another location that appeared in Victoria's restaurant redemption research. Carmen parked where they could observe David and his companion entering the wine bar together. The woman was clearly familiar with David's preferences and habits, suggesting a relationship that had been developing for months rather than weeks. "How long do you think this has been going on?" Carmen asked. Victoria considered the timeline of suspicious loyalty program activity. Based on the redemption patterns, at least 6 months, maybe longer. The realization that David had been maintaining this relationship throughout her entire pregnancy felt like a separate betrayal. While Victoria was focused on preparing for their first child together, David was building a romantic relationship with another woman using rewards points that Victoria had earned through careful financial management. Carmen drove Victoria home in thoughtful silence, both women processing what they had witnessed. The surveillance had provided exactly the evidence Victoria needed, but it had also confirmed the end of her 20-year marriage during one of the most vulnerable periods of her life. "What happens now?" Carmen asked as they pulled into Victoria's driveway. Victoria looked at her house, the home she had shared with David for 15 years. Everything looked the same from the outside, but she knew she would never see it the same way again. "Now I call Margaret and start protecting myself and my daughter," Victoria said with quiet determination. "David has been planning his double life for months. It is time for me to start planning our future without him." As Victoria walked toward her front door, she felt her daughter kicking actively, as if sensing the significant changes ahead. Victoria placed her hand on her belly and spoke quietly to her unborn child. "Do not worry, little one. Mommy is going to make sure we are both protected and provided for. Your father made his choices, and now Mommy is going to make hers." 3 hours later, David returned home with carefully manufactured evidence of his supposed golf game. His clothes were appropriately rumpled. He carried a scorecard showing a respectable 85, and he had even acquired a slight sunburn that suggested hours outdoors. Victoria waited in the living room, having spent the afternoon organizing her evidence and preparing for the most important conversation of her marriage. The surveillance operation had provided the final confirmation she needed. Now it was time to confront David with the complete truth about his deception. "How was your day, honey?" David asked cheerfully as he entered the house, setting his golf bag in the hallway closet. "Did you get some organizing done for the baby's room?" Victoria looked at her husband of 20 years, noting how easily he maintained his fabricated story. His performance was flawless, delivered with the confidence of someone who believed his wife was too trusting and inattentive to question his weekend activities. "Sit down, David," Victoria said, her voice carrying a new authority that made him look at her more carefully. "We need to discuss your travel rewards usage in detail." David's cheerful expression shifted slightly, but he maintained his casual demeanor. More loyalty program questions, Victoria. I thought we resolved all that last week with the business expense explanation. Victoria gestured to the coffee table, where she had arranged months of loyalty program statements in chronological order. But this time, she had also prepared a detailed analysis showing patterns, costs, and timelines that painted an undeniable picture of systematic deception. These are not business expenses, David, Victoria said directly. These are romantic getaways with your mistress, paid for with rewards points I earned through our joint financial management. David's face went pale, but he attempted to maintain his denial. Victoria, you are being ridiculous. I explained about client entertainment and business development expenses. Then explain this, Victoria said, presenting a printed email confirmation. 75,000 Marriott points redeemed for a romantic weekend at the St. Regis San Francisco. The booking includes couples massage appointments, champagne service, and dinner reservations for two at the hotel's most intimate restaurant. David reached for the paper, scanning it quickly. This was for the Peterson Group executives. They specifically requested luxury accommodations for their site visit. On the same weekend, I was visiting my mother in Sacramento, Victoria continued methodically. While you claimed to be attending a business conference in Los Angeles, David's confident businessman voice began to waver. The conference was canceled. The Peterson meeting was moved to San Francisco at the last minute. Victoria pulled out her phone and played an audio recording. During her week of preparation, she had called the St. Regis directly, identifying herself as Mrs. Martinez and requesting details about their March reservation for verification purposes. David's voice came through the phone speaker clearly. My wife is pregnant and cannot travel, so I am bringing my business associate Rebecca instead. We will need the champagne service and couples massage appointments as originally requested. The blood drained from David's face as he heard his own voice confirming the deceptive nature of his booking. Victoria had obtained the recording legally, since the hotel maintained customer service records for quality assurance purposes. Business associate Rebecca, Victoria asked pointedly. The same Rebecca who accompanied you to Pacific Heights this morning instead of your golf tournament. David's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. His carefully constructed explanations were collapsing under the weight of Victoria's methodical investigation. Victoria's phone rang, interrupting the confrontation. The caller ID showed Ashley Office, which was strange for a Saturday afternoon. Victoria looked at David, whose expression had shifted from denial to panic. Answer it, Victoria said, holding the phone between them so they could both hear the conversation. A woman's voice came through the speaker, but it was not Ashley. David, are we still on for wine tasting tomorrow? I wanted to confirm our reservation at the Napa Valley Vineyard. The moment of absolute silence stretched between Victoria, David, and the woman on the phone. Victoria recognized the voice from her surveillance that morning and from the conversation she had overheard in David's office. Who is this? The woman asked when no one responded immediately. This is Victoria Martinez, David's wife, Victoria said calmly. And you are? The phone went dead immediately, leaving David and Victoria staring at each other across the coffee table, covered with evidence of his betrayal. David's attempt at damage control was pathetic. Victoria, I can explain everything. It is not what you think. Anturnum, what I think, Victoria said, standing up slowly despite her pregnancy, is that you have been having an affair for months while I am carrying your child. What I think is that you have been using rewards points I earned to finance romantic getaways with your mistress. What I think is that you have been lying to me every day while planning a double life. David's voice became higher and more desperate. It just happened. Victoria, you have been so focused on the pregnancy, so tired all the time. Rebecca and I work closely together, and it just developed naturally. The admission hung in the air like a confession. David had stopped denying the affair and moved to justifying it, revealing the depth of his selfishness and the extent of his emotional manipulation. So this is my fault, Victoria asked, her voice dangerously quiet. My pregnancy made you have an affair. That is not what I meant, David backtracked frantically. I love you, Victoria. You and the baby are everything to me. This thing with Rebecca, it does not mean anything. Victoria looked at the loyalty program statements spread across the table, representing thousands of dollars in carefully accumulated rewards that David had spent on something that does not mean anything. 6 months of romantic getaways, Victoria said, reading from her analysis. Luxury hotels, expensive dinners, couples massage appointments, wine country weekends. If this does not mean anything to you, then our 20-year marriage definitely does not mean anything to you. David stood up and tried to approach Victoria, but she stepped backward, protecting her pregnant belly from his attempted embrace. Pack a bag, David, Victoria said with calm finality. Stay somewhere else tonight. We can discuss next steps through our attorneys. Our attorneys? David's voice cracked. Victoria, we do not need lawyers. We can work through this together. Marriage counseling, rebuilding trust, whatever you need. Victoria gathered the loyalty program statements back into their organized pile. David, you spent our family's resources on an affair while I am pregnant with your child. You lied to me every single day while planning romantic getaways with another woman. You mocked my intelligence to your mistress, calling me inattentive and trusting. David's attempts to minimize his behavior revealed how little he understood about the magnitude of his betrayal. He saw his affair as a temporary indiscretion that could be forgiven and forgotten. Victoria saw it as the complete destruction of their partnership and the foundation of their family. I need you to leave, Victoria repeated. Tonight. David stood frozen for a moment, apparently realizing that his confident dismissal of Victoria's analytical capabilities had been a catastrophic miscalculation. The woman he had underestimated had methodically uncovered every detail of his deception and built an airtight case against him. Victoria watched her husband of 20 years gather his belongings, and for the first time in months, she felt something approaching peace. The confusion and self-doubt were over. The evidence was clear. The truth was revealed, and now she could focus on building a future for herself and her daughter. The sound of David's car leaving the driveway marked the end of their marriage and the beginning of Victoria's transformation into someone she had never planned to become, a single mother with the analytical skills and determination to protect her family's financial future. The next morning, Victoria made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of staying home to process her emotional trauma, she was driving through the rolling hills of Napa Valley toward a wine tasting venue she had never visited but knew intimately from David's loyalty program, Redemptions. Victoria had spent the sleepless night reviewing David's pattern of deception, and she realized his relationship with Rebecca had become predictable and routine. The wine tasting reservation for Sunday afternoon was confirmed through his rewards account, paid for with points Victoria had earned through their joint financial management. Carmen had offered to accompany her, but Victoria needed to handle this confrontation alone. Her pregnancy made the 2-hour drive uncomfortable, but her determination overcame the physical discomfort. She needed to see David and Rebecca together in the context of their romantic relationship, using rewards that belonged to Victoria's marriage. The GPS directed Victoria through scenic vineyard country to an upscale tasting room that specialized in intimate wine experiences for couples. The irony was not lost on her that David was using their family's rewards to create romantic memories with another woman in one of California's most beautiful settings. Victoria parked her car in the gravel lot, listening to the peaceful sounds of vineyard lifebirds singing, distant conversations from other visitors, the gentle clinking of wine glasses from the outdoor tasting area. The contrast between the serene environment and her emotional turmoil felt surreal. She spotted David's BMW immediately, parked near the entrance in a spot that suggested they had arrived early to maximize their romantic wine country experience. Victoria checked her appearance in the car mirror, noting that her pregnancy gave her a dignity and authority that would make this confrontation even more powerful. Victoria walked slowly toward the outdoor tasting area, her pregnancy making her movements deliberate and noticeable. Other vineyard visitors glanced at her with the kind of protective concern people naturally felt toward pregnant women, which would make David's behavior seem even more inappropriate to potential witnesses. David and Rebecca were seated at a corner table with a view of the vineyards, engaged in intimate conversation over a flight of premium wines. Rebecca looked even more elegant in person than she had during Victoria's surveillance, dressed in expensive casual clothes that suggested someone with significant personal income and sophisticated tastes. Victoria approached their table with quiet determination, her footsteps on the wooden deck announcing her arrival. David looked up from his wine glass and his face went completely white when he saw his pregnant wife standing beside their romantic table. "Hello, David," Victoria said in a voice that carried clearly across the outdoor tasting area. "Enjoying your loyalty program rewards?" Rebecca looked confused, glancing between David and Victoria without immediately understanding the situation. Other vineyard patrons began turning toward their table, sensing drama developing in the peaceful setting. "Victoria," David stammered, half rising from his chair, "what are you doing here?" "I came to see how our family's credit card points were being used," Victoria replied, her voice projecting clearly enough for nearby tables to hear. "These wine tastings were paid for with rewards I earned through our joint accounts." Rebecca's expression shifted from confusion to dawning horror as she realized who Victoria was. "David, you told me you were divorced," she said, her voice carrying a note of betrayal that Victoria found grimly satisfying. The revelation that David had lied to both women simultaneously created a moment of shared understanding between Victoria and Rebecca. Both women had been manipulated by the same man, though in very different ways. "Not divorced," Victoria said directly to Rebecca. "Married for 20 years, 6 months pregnant with his first child, and the person who earned all the rewards, points being used for your romantic getaways." David attempted damage control, but his voice was shaking. "Ladies, please, we can discuss this privately. There is no need to make a scene." Victoria looked around the vineyard tasting area, noting the uncomfortable expressions of other patrons who were witnessing this domestic confrontation. "You made this public when you brought your mistress to a romantic wine tasting using rewards I earned for our family?" Rebecca stood up abruptly, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "David, you have been lying to me for months. You said your ex-wife was difficult and vindictive, not pregnant with your baby." The detail about David's portrayal of Victoria as his difficult ex-wife revealed the extent of his manipulation and dishonesty. He had created entirely fictional narratives for both women to justify his behavior. Victoria addressed Rebecca directly. "Woman to woman. He has been using rewards I earned through our joint accounts to finance this relationship. The hotel stays, restaurant reservations, wine tastings, all paid for with points I accumulated through careful financial management of our household budget." Rebecca looked horrified. "I had no idea. David told me he was financially independent and paid for everything himself." The conversation was attracting more attention from other vineyard visitors, who were trying to balance their natural curiosity with respect for the privacy of the people involved. Victoria realized she had created exactly the kind of public accountability that David had been avoiding through his careful deception. 6 months of romantic getaways," Victoria continued, reading from notes she had prepared. "Using our American Airlines miles, Marriott points, Chase Sapphire rewards, and restaurant loyalty programs, all while I managed our household finances and prepared for our first child." David's carefully constructed double life was collapsing in real time, witnessed by strangers who would forever remember the pregnant wife confronting her husband's mistress at a Napa Valley wine tasting. His professional reputation and personal credibility were being destroyed by his own poor judgment and Victoria's methodical documentation. Rebecca gathered her purse and stood to leave. "David, this is over. I cannot be involved with someone who lies to his pregnant wife and uses her financial resources to deceive both of us." Victoria felt a moment of respect for Rebecca, who was handling the revelation with more dignity than David deserved. The other woman had been manipulated too, just in different ways. "Rebecca," Victoria said as the younger woman prepared to leave, "I am sorry you were lied to as well. David is very good at creating false narratives when it serves his purposes." Rebecca nodded gratefully. "I hope you and your baby will be okay. You deserve much better than this." After Rebecca left, Victoria and David stood alone at the wine tasting table, surrounded by the evidence of his deception and the curious stares of other vineyard patrons. David looked completely defeated, his confident businessman persona destroyed by his own arrogance and dishonesty. "Victoria, please," David said quietly. "Can we go somewhere private to discuss this?" Victoria looked at her husband of 20 years, noting how small and pathetic he appeared when stripped of his lies and manipulations. The man who had mocked her intelligence to his mistress was now begging for private conversation after being publicly exposed by her investigative skills. "There is nothing to discuss, David," Victoria said calmly. "Your attorney can contact my attorney about divorce proceedings and asset division, including the value of all the loyalty program rewards you misappropriated for your affair." Victoria walked away from the wine tasting table, leaving David to explain himself to the vineyard staff and other patrons. As she drove away from Napa Valley, she felt something she had not experienced in months. She felt powerful. The woman who had been dismissed as inattentive and trusting had just destroyed her husband's credibility in the most public way possible. David's arrogance had been his downfall, and Victoria's analytical skills had been her weapon. For the first time since discovering the loyalty program discrepancies, Victoria smiled. Her daughter was going to have a mother who fought for what was right and never accepted being underestimated or dismissed. 2 weeks later, Victoria sat in Margaret Chen's downtown law office, surrounded by the familiar sounds of legal practice phones ringing, printers working, and the constant murmur of attorneys discussing complex cases. But unlike her previous visit, Victoria's voice carried strength and confidence rather than uncertainty and fear. "The documentation you have provided is exceptional," Margaret said, reviewing the thick folder of loyalty program statements, hotel confirmations, and financial records that Victoria had assembled. "I have handled many high-asset divorce cases, but rarely have I seen such thorough evidence of financial infidelity." Victoria had spent the past 2 weeks methodically building her legal case with the same analytical skills she had used to optimize their family's reward programs. Every point redemption, every unauthorized booking, every romantic getaway had been documented and valued according to current market rates for equivalent cash expenditures. "The total value of misappropriated rewards exceeds $75,000, Victoria reported, consulting her detailed analysis. "That represents 3 years of accumulated points and miles from our joint financial management." Margaret made notes on her legal pad, calculating the implications for divorce settlement negotiations. Financial infidelity through loyalty programs is becoming increasingly common in divorce proceedings. California law treats these rewards as marital assets, and their misuse for extramarital affairs constitutes dissipation of community property. Victoria felt vindicated by the legal framework that supported her position. Her expertise with financial management was finally being recognized as a valuable contribution to their marriage rather than a mundane domestic responsibility. David's attorney has been arguing that the affair was temporary and that the financial impact was minimal, Margaret continued. "But your documentation proves systematic deception over months, involving significant marital assets." Victoria had received David's initial settlement offer through Margaret, and it revealed how little he understood about his legal position. David was attempting to minimize Victoria's contributions to their marriage and downplay the financial value of his affair-related expenses. "He offered me 30% of our total assets," Victoria said, reviewing David's proposal, "and he wants to maintain control over all loyalty program accounts, claiming they are connected to his business travel requirements." Margaret shook her head. "Completely unacceptable. Your management of these accounts contributed directly to your family's wealth accumulation. The optimization strategies you implemented saved thousands of dollars annually in travel and entertainment expenses." This was the first time anyone had explicitly recognized Victoria's financial expertise as a measurable contribution to their marriage's success. For 20 years, David had benefited from her analytical skills while treating her work as invisible domestic labor. "I want to start a consulting business," Victoria announced, "helping other people optimize their loyalty program strategies. I have been managing million-dollar budgets disguised as household expenses, and I want to monetize that expertise." Margaret smiled approvingly. Excellent. Independent income will strengthen your negotiating position and provide long-term financial security for you and your daughter. Victoria had been developing her business plan during the emotional upheaval of the past month. Her expertise with rewards optimization was genuinely valuable, and word-of-mouth referrals from friends had already generated several potential clients. Carmen has been helping me network with other women who want to maximize their travel rewards, Victoria explained. Many of them have significant spending power, but lack the time or knowledge to optimize their points earning. The conversation shifted to custody arrangements and child support calculations. David's millionaire status meant their daughter would be entitled to substantial financial support, but Victoria wanted to ensure her own independence, rather than relying on David's ongoing contributions. I do not want to be financially dependent on David for the rest of my life, Victoria stated firmly. His affair showed me how vulnerable that dependence made me. I want to build my own income stream and protect my daughter's financial future. Margaret outlined the legal framework for asset division in high net worth divorces, Victoria's contributions to their marriage, including her financial management expertise, would be recognized in the settlement calculations. David's dissipation of marital assets through his affair would reduce his share of community property. The loyalty program misappropriation alone justifies a significant adjustment in your favor, Margaret explained. But your overall financial contributions to the marriage provide additional grounds for favorable asset division? Victoria felt a profound sense of validation. The analytical skills that David had dismissed as routine domestic work were being recognized as legitimate business expertise worthy of financial compensation. There is something else, Victoria said. I want David's behavior documented in the custody agreement. His willingness to lie and manipulate during my pregnancy shows a pattern of selfishness that could affect his parenting decisions. Margaret nodded approvingly. Establishing a record of his deceptive behavior protects your daughter's interests in your own parenting authority. As their meeting concluded, Victoria felt transformed from the confused, suspicious woman who had first discovered the loyalty program discrepancies. The evidence she had gathered methodically had become the foundation for her legal case and her financial independence. One more thing, Victoria said as she prepared to leave. I want to make sure Rebecca knows that David lied to her about our divorce status. She deserves to understand how thoroughly she was manipulated. Margaret cautioned about direct contact with David's former mistress, but Victoria's motivation was protective rather than vindictive. Rebecca had been deceived too, and Victoria wanted to prevent other women from being similarly manipulated. Victoria gathered her documents and prepared to return to her new apartment. The house she had shared with David was being sold as part of the divorce settlement, but Victoria no longer felt sad about leaving their former life behind. I spent 20 years optimizing David's financial life while he planned to betray me, Victoria reflected as she walked toward the elevator. Now I am going to use those same skills to build something better for my daughter and myself. The elevator descended toward the street level, carrying Victoria away from her old life and toward possibilities she had never imagined when she first discovered those suspicious loyalty program statements. For the first time in months, Victoria felt excited about her future, rather than devastated by her past. David's betrayal had revealed her own strength and expertise in ways that 20 years of marriage had never accomplished. 6 months later, Victoria sat in her bright, downtown San Francisco apartment, holding her 3-month-old daughter Emma while conducting a client consultation call about loyalty program optimization. The morning sun streamed through large windows that offered views of the city skyline, a dramatic change from her former suburban life. Mrs. Patterson, based on your spending patterns, you are leaving approximately $8,000 in rewards value on the table annually, Victoria explained to her client while Emma cooed contentedly in her arms. By optimizing your credit card usage and coordinating your loyalty program enrollments, we can significantly increase your travel and entertainment benefits. Victoria's consulting business had grown through word-of-mouth referrals faster than she had anticipated. Women throughout the Bay Area were discovering that Victoria's expertise with financial optimization could transform their reward earning potential while saving substantial money on travel and entertainment expenses. Emma gurgled and reached for Victoria's phone, her tiny fingers fascinated by the technology that enabled her mother's thriving business. Victoria adjusted her daughter in her lap, marveling at how natural single motherhood felt when supported by financial independence and professional fulfillment. The key is treating loyalty programs as integrated financial tools rather than separate accounts. Victoria continued with her client. Most people optimize each program individually, but the real value comes from coordinating strategies across multiple platforms. Carmen arrived for their weekly lunch date, bringing takeout from Victoria's favorite Vietnamese restaurant and updates on mutual friends who were following Victoria's divorce proceedings with admiration and concern. "Girl, you look amazing," Carmen said, settling into Victoria's living room with containers of pho and spring rolls. "Motherhood and entrepreneurship suit you perfectly." Victoria felt genuinely happy for the first time in years. The confusion and self-doubt that had characterized her marriage had been replaced by clarity about her capabilities and confidence in her decisions. "I received another referral from Margaret's law office," Victoria reported while feeding Emma with one hand and reviewing client notes with the other. "A woman going through her own divorce who needs help documenting financial assets hidden in loyalty program accounts." Carmen shook her head in amazement. "So David's betrayal led to your discovery of a completely new career that helps other women protect themselves financially." Victoria had not considered the irony before, but Carmen was right. David's affair had revealed Victoria's investigative skills and analytical expertise in ways that 20 years of marriage never had. His attempt to exploit her financial management abilities had ultimately led to her professional independence. "Emma is going to grow up knowing that her mother built something meaningful from difficult circumstances," Victoria said, looking down at her daughter's bright, alert eyes. "She will never have to depend on someone else's honesty for her financial security." Emma responded with enthusiastic baby sounds, as if approving of her mother's business plan. Victoria had been talking to Emma throughout her pregnancy and infancy, explaining her work and decisions as if her daughter could understand the importance of financial independence and self-respect. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text message from Susan Williams, her neighbor who had provided emotional support during the divorce proceedings. Susan was forwarding an article about David's company, where he had recently been passed over for a promotion that everyone expected him to receive. Apparently, David's public meltdown at the wine tasting damaged his professional reputation, Carmen said, reading the article over Victoria's shoulder. "Word spread through their industry about his behavior during your pregnancy." Victoria felt no satisfaction in David's professional difficulties. His career problems were consequences of his own choices, not revenge she had sought. Her focus was entirely on building her own future, rather than monitoring David's declining prospects. "He has visitation rights with Emma every other weekend," Victoria said matter-of-factly. "We maintain minimal contact for legal purposes only. His relationship choices are no longer my concern." Emma began fussing slightly, and Victoria shifted her daughter to a more comfortable position while continuing to review client files. The multitasking required for single motherhood and entrepreneurship felt natural and energizing, rather than overwhelming. Victoria's consulting business was generating enough income to support her and Emma comfortably while building savings for the future. The skills she had developed managing her household budget had translated perfectly to helping other women optimize their financial lives. "I have a client consultation this afternoon with a woman whose husband has been using their travel rewards for unauthorized expenses," Victoria explained. "She suspects an affair but needs help documenting the financial evidence." Carmen smiled knowingly. "So you are helping other women become financial detectives, just like you did with David." Victoria realized that her experience with David's betrayal had equipped her to help other women navigate similar situations. Her analytical approach to uncovering deception could protect other families from financial infidelity and emotional manipulation. "Most women underestimate their financial expertise," Victoria reflected while organizing Emma's afternoon nap schedule around her business calls. "We manage complex household budgets and optimize family spending, but we do not recognize those skills as valuable business capabilities." As Carmen prepared to leave for her own afternoon meetings, Victoria felt grateful for the friendship that had sustained her through her transformation from betrayed wife to independent entrepreneur. The network of women who had supported her during the divorce had become her professional and personal community. Emma fell asleep in Victoria's arms as she returned to her laptop to prepare for her next client consultation. The baby's peaceful expression reminded Victoria of all the reasons she had fought so hard to protect their financial future and build something meaningful from David's betrayal. Victoria's phone rang with a call from a potential new client. Victoria Martinez Consulting. This is Victoria speaking. Mrs. Martinez, I got your number from Margaret Chen's law office, the caller said. I think my husband has been using our airline miles for trips I never authorized, and I need help understanding what I am looking at in these statements. Victoria smiled, opening a new client file on her computer. I would be happy to help you analyze those redemption patterns. Most of us do not recognize our own expertise with financial management until we need to investigate irregularities. As Victoria began her consultation, Emma sleeping peacefully beside her, she felt the satisfaction of work that was both personally meaningful and professionally valuable. David's attempt to exploit her financial skills had ultimately led to her liberation and independence. This is what victory sounds like, Victoria thought to herself as she helped another woman understand the value of her own analytical capabilities. The sound of productive work, a sleeping baby, and a future built on expertise rather than dependence. Victoria had transformed from a woman who managed million-dollar budgets disguised as domestic responsibilities into someone who helped other women recognize and monetize their hidden financial expertise. David's betrayal had been the catalyst, but Victoria's strength and intelligence had been the foundation for everything she had built since. Emma stirred slightly in her sleep, and Victoria gently adjusted her daughter's position while continuing to provide financial guidance to a woman who was discovering, just as Victoria had, that she was much more capable and valuable than anyone had ever told her. Someday you will know your worth from the beginning, Victoria whispered to Emma. You will never let anyone treat your contributions as invisible, and you will never depend on someone else's honesty for your security. Outside her apartment windows, San Francisco continued its busy rhythm of commerce and life. Victoria was now part of that energy, building something meaningful for herself and her daughter, while helping other women transform their own lives through financial independence and self-respect. The loyalty program statements that had once revealed her husband's betrayal were now tools she used to help other women protect themselves and their families. Victoria had turned evidence of her greatest vulnerability into the foundation of her professional strength. This was what victory sounded like: the productive hum of meaningful work, the peaceful breathing of a well-cared-for child, and the confident voice of a woman who had discovered her true value through surviving her greatest challenge. Victoria Martinez had found her calling in the ruins of her marriage, and both she and Emma were going to benefit from that transformation for the rest of their lives.